recording this event, and you'll be able to access a copy of a recording off the school website once we've put it up there. We've got a fantastic group of speakers for you this afternoon from a very diverse range of aspects from the construction industry that have very different perspectives on COVID-19, what happened during the lockdown, what's happened after the lockdown, what we've learned from it, and the perspective going forward. So the format for today is I'm going to ask each of the speakers in a moment to introduce themselves. They're just going to talk. We're not subjecting you this afternoon to death by PowerPoint or an online version of that. We're just going to ask them to speak freely from their perspective around the issues. You will see a chat function on your screen, so do please feel free to type in any questions or comments that you might have during the course of the afternoon session. My colleague Rosie is on the call. She's going to be moderating the chat and helping us with the questions. So when we get to the end of each, we get to the end of all of the speakers and their perspectives, I'll actually moderate the discussion, ask questions on your behalf, prompt a conversation between the speakers to try and really kind of tease out some of the issues. We're due to be online until 3:30 this afternoon. It's 1:30 just gone at the moment. If we finish early, we'll finish early, but we definitely won't finish late. I don't believe in doing that. You will find at the end of the session today an online feedback form will pop up, so please do feel free to complete that. We're now into 100 days of lockdown, I think, so we're starting to get used to running events virtually, but every day is a school day. We're always learning new things about these techniques and how we can use them. So your feedback is very valuable to us. So without further ado, I'm going to crack on and just ask each of the speakers in turn to introduce themselves, to give us a view from their perspective. Then we'll move on to the next speaker. And as I say, please feel free to enter any questions or comments on the chat function as we go through the afternoon. So I'm going to start with Brendan, if I can ask you to introduce yourself and give us a view from the perspective of your business. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. I'm Brendan Smith, Commercial Operations Manager for O'Neill and Brennan. We work in construction recruitment for labour and trade supply, professional and technical, construction logistics, rail and civils. We span across 17 regional offices in the UK and Ireland, which has brought about its own kind of challenges, because the UK HSE, the Irish HSE have had a different take on it. Ireland's moved at a different pace with a stricter lockdown. And I'll cover that off in a minute with some of our three key offerings. About myself, I worked with HBG and BAM for 8 years. I've been with O&B for 5 years, and I focus on social value initiatives, trying to add more value to our clients. A few specifics on what we actually did as a business. So we're always focusing on what was happening in Europe to try and see what was going to happen over in the UK and take steps to manage those risks before they happened. The initial restrictions that we put in place were no site visits. A lot of our business is account management, one-to-one, face-to-face, managing requirements, and then straight away everything was working from home. The fluid situation with the guidance changing from CLC version 3 to version 4. Also another update on June the 4th. We have the face coverings on public transport. All this information needs to be communicated to 3,000 workers that we have on site today. Logistics, where we're actually managing more of the processes on site rather than just placing labour into a role. We've updated some of our procedures there, all of our procedures there, full risk assessments, and some interesting innovations which I'll touch on. From a company perspective on the business continuity plan, we use market insight software to monitor the sites that are closed, the sites that were still open, but also keep tabs on the sites that were reopening. That allowed us to prorata the resources that we had in relation to that. So with offices in Ireland, and we knew that all projects were shut, bar healthcare, we could manage that situation. Scotland, reopening later than England, and the same with Wales. We're able to keep tabs on that information in simple reporting fashion and stay updated. All of our offices have remained open throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. There was always going to be a requirement, no matter how small, for labour and to try and help people, help our customers out. And all 17 are still open to this day. The three key new offerings, training, we had a chance to try and refocus the company targets during lockdown, actually see what we wanted to do over the next 12 months. Supply chain sustainability school has been a bit of a pioneer with initiatives to tackle the unskilled and skilled shortage. We're no different, being a partner. We have a constructor career course. We're now looking at transferable skills from hospitality, from aviation industries into new positions to do our bit to try and help the unskilled shortage. From our constructor career course, which is entry-level CSCS, the actual calibre of learner that we're seeing now compared to 12 months ago is poles apart. It's so much better. These are really employable people, and we've got a real chance to affect change on the industry. So that's something we've been doing. The COVID-19 compliance training course. So this actually stemmed from our Ireland business. The Irish HSE made it a requirement, or the CIF have released now a free training video, but back in the early days, it was a requirement for everyone that was going back to work to have some form of training before they did so. Where the UK sites, some of the UK sites stayed open, there was no actual formal request, like no HSE request to say that that had to happen, even though the obligation and duties of contractors to put people to work, all of those updating procedures were going to be in place. So in order to provide this training to our workforce and to the wider community, there's an ethical obligation there. We created a COVID-19 compliance training course, which was facilitated by Ireland to start with. And we've rolled it out across the country, opened it up to all of our customers. And I suppose a change that we can clearly say has happened is COVID-19 marshals on site, whether that be COVID-19 marshals, COVID-19 supervisors, COVID-19 managers. It's the interpretation of the site and guided by the health and safety departments of those clients. So in a sense, you could say it's a one-size-fits-all solution, but it's all dependent on the site constraints. And I think one thing that we've actually been focusing on in the last 7 days is the capability to have COVID-19 testing. Hopefully it's never required, but we see in the news about Leicester going into a lockdown. Does that mean that construction has to stop? I don't know. Would it be helpful if we could completely prove that a particular site, 100% of the people didn't have COVID, or if 100% of the people had high levels of antibodies, therefore were a low risk to contracting it again? So we've sorted out that capability with a quick turnaround. It can be done in a bulk fashion. Again, that's a contingency that we're looking at that we'll be able to provide to our customers. The refocus. So just to tie off my quick chat. We focused on training, internal and external, for some of the furloughed employees, but also for some of the staff that we've had out on site. We've had a chance to refocus on Section 106 obligation solutions that we provide to our customers, and we've enhanced that offering. We've set women into construction KPIs. The cohort that we're getting on these training courses at the moment is probably 30% women already. We've had to change our delivery of the training model. I know there's been a lot about digitalisation of training over the last 12 months. We're now actually doing this for the entry-level training course. And finally, increase our suite of training initiatives, including the COVID-19 Marshall course. We expect more localised lockdowns. We need to be fluid to move and help those customers potentially do this testing, stay open. Requirements in Scotland when they open more sites to place more COVID marshals to help them enforce the procedures and updates. That's where we're at the moment as O'Neill and Brennan. And yeah, thanks very much, Sean. Thanks for having me. Look forward to the question and answer.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Brendan. Lots to go at there. A few things to think about for the Q&A going forward. You mentioned communication with the workforce, and that, I guess, has been a challenge for many of our partners. Very interested in your points about the quality of candidates coming through, potentially from other sectors wanting to join the construction sector, and that is quite fascinating. You know, we have a skills shortage, and is there almost a kind of silver lining there? And then the whole question about testing, and can we test people on site? So yeah, lots of food for thought in there, which I appreciate. And then we'll obviously open up the discussion as we go through. So next, I'd like to introduce Carl, if you'd like to introduce yourself and give us a very different perspective from the housing sector. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sean. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carl Barstow, Head of Membership Development for an organisation called Efficiency North. We're a not-for-profit social housing consortium owned by 34 different social landlord members, predominantly across Yorkshire and Humberside, but increasingly across the north of England. We have 3 operating companies sat within Efficiency North, one called EM Procure, which lets construction frameworks and supports members around the use of those construction frameworks, both in terms of service frameworks, but also works frameworks. We run Enable Futures, which is the region's only shared apprenticeship service, which seeks to drive employment outcomes and apprenticeships, reaching deep into members' communities to seek to fulfil those requirements and provide candidates from them by letting apprentices move from one contract to another, potentially with different employers. We also run Enable Build, which is a not-for-profit development vehicle, delivering new build housing and move installed private development sites forward. And we also establish a charity, Enable Communities, which gives some of our surplus to generate social value deep in members' communities. I'm going to speak briefly about the impact of COVID-19 on the housing sector, predominantly on how the sector's responded, some of the issues and challenges. Obviously, once we started to enter lockdown, the impact of COVID-19 on the housing sector, social housing sector, was quite wide-ranging. Obviously, we saw a lot of all organisations really pausing all responsive repairs, apart from those deemed essential, having to move quite to an agile model of delivery. Also, quite a few staff moved from what may be frontline investment services to sort of frontline tenant support services, supporting people who were entering into lockdown and vulnerable and shielded tenants. In relation to planned investment works, you know, all planned investment works were pretty much pressed pause in relation to internal works. And obviously, working in tenanted homes within the construction sector is probably one of the most challenging environments to do so in a COVID secure way, both in terms of protecting operatives, but entering households in which it was uncertain as to what conditions you'd be entering. We're starting now to see a return to some aspects of investment, albeit landlords themselves have been impacted quite substantially by tenants not paying rent, tenants getting into arrears in relation to their energy and utility services. And I'll talk a little bit more about what we've done to support that. Then in relation, in terms of EM Procure, we've been basically running weekly webinars with our members around all manner of different topics in terms of the impact COVID-19 is having on them, about working with contractors and the supply chain around the PPN02 notice and what that means, and trying to get them to be supportive of contractors, many of which are struggling, particularly those contractors that focus predominantly on planned works. Obviously, they've had to furlough the bulk of their staff, and only now are we starting to see a bit of an easing in terms of investment in housing, and then working with them, both the landlords and the contractors as a collective, trying to develop up RAMS risk assessment method statements that are suitable, obviously building off the back of the CLC guidance, but having to tailor them even more for the conditions of working in tenanted properties. We've run a whole range of other webinars really around aspects such as how building safety compliance can still be undertaken, and some of the methods and tactics that members have developed in relation to that around low carbon retrofit, because that agenda is not going away, neither in terms of the development of higher performance new build, but also the existing stock retrofit, and whether there's been recent engagement by BAYS over this last couple of weeks with members around seeking knowledge around what properties could be brought up to EPCC around shovel-ready projects, which hopefully will may be released in terms of infrastructure investment as a bit of a kickstart to the economy from September through to March and beyond into next year. We've run webinars around new build and the impact it's had on new build sites. Some contractors never paused, and new build sites carried on running all the way through COVID-19. But in terms of what they were starting to see around external works predominantly carrying on really unaffected, other than aspects of material supply challenges that there were when merchants closed. But internal works generally being prolonged by about 40% because of social distancing, issues with manual handling, etc. And then webinars around employment and skills and the impact it was having in terms of apprentices being furloughed, how colleges were changing their delivery approach, what was happening to the current cohort of apprentices, and the sign-off of their apprenticeships through this summer, and the changes they were making in relation to delivery of training, how the manual aspect of apprenticeships were being signed off. And more recently, webinar around digitalisation in housing. I think we can all accept in terms of the impact that COVID-19's and having our businesses in terms of movement to more digitalisation. All of our social landlords are on a digitalisation journey anyway over the next 3 to 5 years. This, I think, has put rocket boosters under it, and we're working with our members in terms of collaboration around that agenda, in helping them learn from one another, in trying to digitalise their businesses, which this is parachuting forward by some degree in terms of the use of apps and remote assistance, video technology, to avoid operatives necessarily having to go into people's homes, using the remote assistance app developed by Total Mobile, very good app at low cost that should be looked at a bit closer by organisations trying to do that, but also has many different use cases. So yeah, in terms of challenges going forward, in terms of new build, we haven't really seen COVID-19 having any impact on members' new build aspirations. I think there are more strategic issues in terms of the release of the new affordable housing programme, grant levels for April next year and beyond. We're expecting to hear from government in February, but that's not come through as yet. So hopefully in this next few weeks, we'll get to find out what levels of grant will be available to social landlords in developing new build schemes from beyond April next year, because at the moment there's a bit of reticence starting to build now around what levels of grant there will be, certainly around Part L consultation as well, and Part F consultation around building regs, in terms of what ratchet may be brought in terms of that, bringing any of that forward, and grant levels to match that. So very quick whistle-stop tour of issues around housing. More than happy to answer any questions from anybody in terms of what that might well mean.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, there's a few questions now appearing on the chat, so do keep them coming. Obviously, you know, a whole different perspective in terms of the social housing sector, and the effect on tenants, and tenants are unable to pay their rent, unable to pay their fuel bills, etc. There was a Carl mentioned, obviously, large numbers of staff on furlough. So what happens when furlough finishes? Are we likely to see job losses, or do we still have skill shortages? And also the question of digital and offsite, and the role that that some technology might play going forward into the future. So some fascinating stuff like that. And yeah, still some questions coming through, which is absolutely brilliant. Thank you for that. So if I'd like to introduce Chris next, who's going to come to you with another different perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. So my name's Chris Gill. I'm a director at L Lynch Plant Hire and Haulage. So we're a national supplier of operated and self-drive plant equipment. We also have a large fleet of haulage and transport lorries. So we do muck away and aggregate supply right across the country. So thanks for the school for reaching out and asking for a plant hire perspective on this call. I think COVID's been a real learning curve for all of us who are either listening or participating, where everything's been new to most of us, and we've only really heard on a handful of occasions people that have put a pandemic in their disaster plans or their emergency plans. So yeah, I think that's been the biggest challenge of understanding what's next. So a little bit about me. So I've worked for Lynch for nearly 9 years now. I joined the business and worked in our Midlands depot, which is in Northamptonshire, as a transport and service manager, and later a depot manager, and then moved into our head office a few years back. So my own personal experiences of COVID times and lockdown was working from home. So the first time I've ever worked from home in my working career, which was quite interesting. Homeschooling of two young daughters of mine, which is a challenge that when I joined the construction industry, I didn't think I'd be learning my phonics again, but that's something I had to do. So I think all of this has really added to the people element of COVID. So as a business, our biggest driver is our people. So I think when all of this was kind of starting off in January and February, we were looking at what was going on in different parts of the world and curious whether it would reach Europe and then reach Britain. And when it did, our first key thing we needed to do was to make sure that our people were safe. So whether that was our plant operators and our lorry drivers who are out on site throughout the whole of lockdown, making sure they're safe. So talking to the clients that they're working for, some big and some small, to understand what they have in place and what they'd like us to help with, whether it be cleanliness of machines, or it be removing our lorry drivers asking for signatures, just some basic stuff like that. And then really the people in the office, it was to remove them from that office environment initially in a safe way for them and for the business. So not to put too much stress on what we're doing. So we were fortunate to do a remote test of running the business remotely 2 weeks prior to lockdown. So we switched our servers remotely, and everybody logged on from their kitchens and their bedrooms and their studies to run the business for a couple of hours, which was very successful, but give us some good learning points that we then used over the next number of weeks. So again, during the lockdown procedure, whilst most of us were working remotely, we still had a huge number of plant operators, working out on site, fitters and service engineers in our depots and travelling the country, along with our lorry drivers delivering and collecting plant. And I think the biggest thing for them was, or biggest thing we could do for them was just to make sure they were informed. So to give them our understanding of what was happening on a daily basis with the briefings from the government in the afternoon. And then what were we doing as a business and what we were doing alongside our customers to make sure that they would stay safe and potentially stop any further spread of any disease that was out there, which I think a lot of our staff really appreciated, all the updates we did, text messages, emails, just basic stuff to just make sure that they were okay and make sure they were well at home and their friends and their families were doing well. So we brought in a lot of wellness calls, a lot of Microsoft Teams meetings, and that was for the staff that were working and for the staff that weren't as well. Because I think after the first couple of weeks, when a lot of people were talking about physical health, after a couple of weeks, I think a lot of it turned to mental health with people working at home and actually finding out that going into the office or going into their site is actually solace for them. So they get a bit more peace and quiet at work than they do at home. So I think the people element is definitely the biggest thing that we've concentrated on. And now as we introduce staff back into our offices, we've done a fantastic job of making sure that our offices are extremely safe and a comfortable environment for people to be in. So everybody was asked back. Everybody that was coming back into the office was asked to do an induction to be shown around the office prior to turning up at work. So when they were coming to start their first full day back, they're already inducted. They understood our protocols and what was expected of them and what they were expecting of us as well. So that eased them into work a little bit more than them turning up and the fear of the unknown, should we say. So we did a re-induction. We had lots of briefings, as I said, and we kind of gave them empowerment themselves to understand that although we can put as many signs up and as many briefings in place, it's up for all of us to govern social distancing and to ask a colleague who if you're not comfortable about the area where they are, then you kindly ask them to just take a step back, and instead of it being one or two people that have to police it, we're asking for everybody to try and police it, which I think's helped. So returning back to the workplace, we've got most of our staff back in place. We've still got some people working from home, as I am today, which is, like I say, something that definitely wasn't in my mindset 12 or 14 weeks ago. And then as we continue out of this with the recovery, there's definitely been a downturn in work in our construction side. We're fortunate that we work alongside a lot of the major contractors, the Balfour Beatties, the Skanskas, the Costain of the world, who really drove to keep projects open. And some of them had initially a small shutdown period while they got their risk assessments and methods and really the processes of how they were going to keep everybody safe in place. But once they had got all of that stuff in place, some of it was a matter of days. We've been basically business as usual, just in a slight downturn, but it's been a steady growth over the last 12 to 14 weeks of more machines back out on site and more lorries moving material and aggregate across the country, and more operators also being comfortable going back to work, which I think is the biggest thing that we can take of all of that. People have got to be comfortable in their surroundings and have got to do their part to help us all in the long run. So I think the sense of camaraderie and collaboration, as somebody touched on earlier on, has been there between our supply chain, our competitors, our customers. There's been a lot of calls to them to make sure they're doing okay and to see if there's anything that we can do to help out. But yeah, I'll kind of leave it there and look forward to the questions once everybody's had their opportunity to talk. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Yeah, again, questions coming through on the chat, so I'm sure we'll get some good conversations going. But again, some interesting perspectives there in terms of you know, how many businesses in our sector did have a pandemic in their contingency plans and their risk management. The self-managing of social distancing and the whole issue of, you know, the way that most of us deal with safety on site, where it's okay to go up to somebody and say, look, I think you're doing something unsafe here. And how does that work in terms of the sort of environment on site? And also, yeah, thanks very much, Chris, for mentioning the mental health issue. Mental health was a massive issue in the construction sector before the pandemic. And is that getting better, getting worse? And have we learned anything about how we deal with mental health? So, yeah, a number of really good meaty topics to pick up on there. So I'd like to introduce Daniel now to give us a perspective from a main contractor's point of view. Daniel. Daniel, I think you might be on mute. I can't hear you. Rosie, can you hear Daniel?
Apologies. Is that better now?
That's better.
Sorry, let's try again. Sorry. Good afternoon. So I'm Daniel Harvey from the Waits Group. I work for the Waits Property Services part of the business. Obviously, as you know, Waits are one of the larger privately owned construction companies in the country, still owned by privately by the Waits family. We got our construction division. We have property services where I work, and Smart Space, and we have our SES mechanical and electrical business. So on my part of the business, we look after, we've got two sides of business. We've got the living space business, which looks after about 500,000 social housing homes on a maintenance basis, anywhere from a man in a van running around and changing a washer in a tap up to full setting of residential properties and kind of everything in between. So we've got quite a diverse portfolio of work that we do on that side. And then we've got the Waits FM business, which looks after about 500 commercial properties across the country, mainly in the public sector, but more and more so in the mainly in the private sector, but more and more in the public sector. As a business, we very much tried to keep work going. We had a 3-day pause, as they called it, for our projects to all close down, take stock of where they are, and make all the necessary adaptation to be running and to be COVID safe. We were running at about 80% of our projects running throughout most of our time. There were some where it was just not possible to keep working, but generally we have tried to. Albeit at slightly lower productivity levels than what we saw before, obviously with less people on site and different shift patterns. We've been involved in a couple of emergency projects, probably the biggest one, the Royal London Hospital, where we fitted out 2 floors to provide respiratory ICU unit. I believe it was around 5 weeks from start to finish, and I think we're on site within a matter of hours of being called. So it's great that we had flexibility to jump on and do this straight away. So I mean, as a business, we have about 4,000 staff. Approximately 25% of those were furloughed, gradually returning back to the business, but there are still quite a few members of staff that are out, which has led to a change in how we work and other people picking up other bits of work that we haven't done before and adapting. All of our offices are closed and are still closed. Our main offices, so the majority of our staff are still working from home, but we're currently at around 80 to 90% of our projects open. I think that we're all trying to adapt at the moment into what this new normal will be, and whether we will be back in the office full time is a debate at the moment. We're much a people-led business, so Waits does very much believe in the people side of things, and the family believe in all this. But so there is a need for people to meet face to face. But do we all need to be jumping on trains every day? Do we need to be travelling hundreds of miles? Is now a debate, and obviously with all the environmental benefits that I think the world has seen with a slowdown in the CO2, that's another side of the debate. So I'd say from my perspective, being in the procurement and change side, without a shadow of doubt, the biggest concern has been making sure that we've got adequate PPE for our teams on site, which has been a struggle, and also increasingly expensive, as I'm sure many people on this call will confirm, as well as making sure that we're not picking up any of the slightly dubious PPE out there, because the last thing we want to do is have people out to work without the right PPE on. The situations with materials was very confused, I think, to start off with, but we've now settled down on that, and with a few exceptions, things seem to be getting back to normal with that. So I think where else with all these changes that have happened, I think it's fair to say that it would normally, in normal world, probably have taken generally we seem to have coped and got through. We, as you've probably seen in the press, we've had to readjust the size of our business, because turnover will be down probably for the next 2 years, we believe. Although within certain parts of our business we are bouncing back again. We get regular messages from the Waits family, and they are supporting the business on a day-to-day basis. They brought in more mental health support if we need it, so there are helplines, there are other ways that we can access it. I think the biggest thing from my perspective, and a few other people that I've seen, is the fact that there is no end date to this. If we knew this was for 6 months, or if we definitely knew by the end of the year we'd be back to working normally again, I think people could cope better. But I think it's the whole unknown of the situation. And we're dealing with things that we haven't had to deal with before, so no one would have been aware of furlough before, and understanding what you can say to people, and what we can and can't talk to people about, and what conversation we can have when they're not working, down to the practical side of, if we've got people who are coming off of work and they've got a van, how long has we got to leave that van sitting around before it's safe to give it to someone else? These are all things that we don't really know, and there's lots of people claiming things out there, so you've got to sometimes work your way through it. But I'd say as a business, Waits are in a strong position. We've always been very financially secure. Clearly, in this marketplace at the moment, cash is king, and I think it's clear that a lot of the businesses out there believe the same, and are keeping going even through these difficult times, which is great to see. We obviously keep a close eye on our supply chain to make sure that we can support them in any way that we possibly can do. Yeah, that's probably it from me. So I think I'll use my 10 minutes up, so I'll hand back to you, Sean.
Thanks very much, Daniel. Again, a few new and interesting things coming out of that. I mediated a webinar recently on healthcare procurement and the whole issue of PPE in hospitals, and obviously PPE procurement has been a big issue for our sector as well. I'm fascinated to hear many of you saying, well, our projects kept going, and we had to keep them going in different circumstances. It's wrong to assume clearly that the whole world just stopped during the coronavirus shutdown, because it didn't. Very interested in your perspective on materials procurement, and one of the things we might discuss later is where do we see that going? I'm starting to see opinions of reshoring a lot of materials procurement and maybe looking at things that can be manufactured closer to home. And the point about this having no end, and when will we get back to normal? Will we ever get back to normal? So some interesting perspectives there, and thank you for that, Daniel. So I'm going to hand over to Gareth now.
Thank you, Sean. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gareth Morris. I'm the Health, Safety, Quality and Environmental Director for the Mawson Group. Mawson Group, if you don't know of them, is a family-owned business like Daniel's. It has two consultancies in the business. One is called Mawson Projects, which is in the engineering and design and process industry. The second is called Waldeck, and that's an architectural design and build consultancy. There are then in the UK 4 main recruitment businesses. Mawson International, which is a large technical recruitment business in both permanent and contract recruitment. Vital Human Resources Limited, which is in the power, M&E and rail area. And is Elite, which is a construction and civil engineering white collar and blue collar agency, and The Bridge, which is an IT recruitment business. So Sean asked the question really, how have we coped? And it's been a real challenging and very interesting time. And I know there's been a great deal of tragedy for many people. But we, as an organization, are relied on by the clients we serve to maintain our supply. And I suppose we had done a lot of preparation for this, not specifically for this pandemic, but we hold, like many of you, various ISO standards. And 2 of the ISO standards, ISO 14001, the Environmental Management System, and ISO 27001, the Information Security Management System, both have sections on disaster recovery and business continuity that are regularly audited by external auditing bodies. So we actually had put some thought and effort into this prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm glad to say that it's worked. We did a trial, probably similar as one of the previous speakers, a couple of weeks before lockdown. We ran some trial remote workings, and that worked very well. And so as soon as lockdown came, we dispatched all our office staff, and within the group, we have approximately 50 offices throughout the UK. Everyone was basically dispatched home. Remote working in itself creates many challenges. Some people have offices, some people don't. Some people have to sit at the kitchen table with the family. It's created all sorts of challenges. We've tried to assist our people where we can. Everyone did a DSE assessment of their home working environment. We dispatched office chairs, mouses, keypads, etc. out to various people to try and help. Sent various communications on how to set up your home desk, how to get better lumbar support from a kitchen chair, and those types of conversations. And just to really help with the physical element of the remote working. As far as the mental health element of it, I think a lot of people were probably struggling 2 or 3 weeks into it, but we're all good at adapting, and I'm pleased to say, we have adapted to remote working from a mental health perspective. We have a very good mental health and well-being business partner in each of the organizations, and they've been fantastic in terms of keeping in touch with people and assisting where they can. I think it throws up further challenges when we will be asking people to come back to the workplace. Because we've got used to working from home and we've settled into new routines, some people with younger families, and some people with elder relatives living at home, and we've worked out how we're going to manage it. And in some situations, people have already returned, and it throws up its own mental challenge again of change and managing that change. So we have basically wellness action plans for bringing people back to work and try and help them with that. The furloughing of staff was another issue. Again, our people team, our HR team, have been fantastic in the way they've kept in contact with people. All line managers have maintained contact with those people on a weekly basis, involve them in the Zoom meetings and Microsoft Team meetings, and try to help them along where they can. Before we have brought some teams back up to 8 weeks ago who are working on government projects who were deemed critical to be back at work. And we learned a lot from that. And we've really understood that communication is absolutely key, and it has to be clear, it has to be concise, and it has to be consistent. We've produced for our workforce an e-booklet which explains what to do while you're working at home and before you come back to the workplace, what to do about traveling to and from work, and what to do at work. We've also produced a sort of fly-by office film that shows all the control measures and safety measures we've put in place, including sanitizing, social distancing markings, measures. In our larger offices, we've got temperature testing stations. So before you're granted access to the building, your temperature is taken. As you all will have done, we completed full risk assessments for the entire organization and made sure that we had a COVID secure policy and processes in place. Each week, either our CEO or our COO, so that's Jed Mason or Adrian Adair, have done weekly podcasts and email newsletters to everybody, just outlining where we are that week, what we're doing, how the businesses are progressing, how they're doing, and just keeping in touch and giving advice and areas where they can communicate and where they can get any help if they need it. Prior to returning to work, like many of you, we've done a return to work brief. We've produced training modules with our training organization, Mawson Training, which are Ofqual approved, on social distancing and on COVID-19 compliance officers. So that's been very useful. I mean, we're very much into e-learning anyway. So we've basically adapted what we've got to suit the situation. In terms of bringing people back, we've started the process in most of our offices, mainly with people who, for whatever reason, find it difficult to work from home. So I think in a way we can divide our people within our organization into 3 groups. We've got one group who want to get back to the office, and they're all back in their offices now. We have another group who probably want a bit more flexibility going forward, a bit of working from home and a bit of working from the office, and another group who are probably very happy working from home and would like to continue with that. And we have to deal with all those different scenarios and provide support and help for those people. At the end of the day, we want to provide a safe working environment, so it's safe for our people in a safe workplace where they feel comfortable. So that's what we've been working towards there. In terms of technology, we've, as I say, introduced temperature testing stations. We've developed a fit for work app for our remote workers where they can log in from remote locations, identify themselves, confirm that they're fit to work, they don't have any symptoms of COVID-19, and confirm they have a safe system of work, the correct PPE, etc. So that's been very useful as well. Our employer assistance program has been in use. So, as I say, the mental health element's been a big part of it. And in the weekly newsletters from our CEO and COO, it's very much been stressed the support we can offer in terms of mental health. And I know change does create a great deal of stress. From our clients' perspective, some of our clients have been as busy as they ever were, such as the certain elements of the rail industry. Others have been a lot quieter. Other sectors have been very quiet. So we've had to manage that. And we're also, in terms of our clients, we've had numerous questionnaires from our clients. How are we dealing with COVID-19? How resilient are we? How strong are we financially? We're fortunate to be fine in the financial area, and we have provided the services to our clients that they've demanded and they've wanted. So I'm pleased that that's worked very well. As far as our supply chain is concerned, as has been previously mentioned, there have been issues with getting PPE, simple, gloves, masks. Some of our clients have their own industry standards, as has been previously mentioned in the construction and in the rail industry. They have their own rail standards. These have been different from sector to sector. So that in itself has created quite a challenge. And even within the rail sector, London Underground will do it differently from Network Rail. So in terms of vehicles, for example, we've got a commercial fleet of approximately 600 vehicles. In those vehicles, for some jobs, we've had to put barriers across and only have a maximum of 2 people per vehicle. In other vehicles, they've been allowed to have more, but they've had to wear masks. And so it's been quite a challenge in terms of meeting the different clients and different sectors' demands. But I'm glad to say we've been very agile and we've thought on our feet and done it as best as possible. In terms of briefing workers on site, before the pandemic, we used to go out. We have a fleet of safety vehicles that go to site. They have safety conversations while they have a brew and have a lot of face-to-face interaction. Obviously, that has stopped with COVID-19, and we have reintroduced it, but obviously on a managed level with social distancing. But we've started doing a lot more of sending out information via email, via social media, via various software systems. And we've developed one of our own in terms of, it's called Mawson Comply, which is very similar to some of the other software systems, proprietary systems out there, where you ask for feedback. You can check how long they were looking at it, and you ask for feedback from there. So but I'll be very interested to see whether that has the same impact in terms of the safety messages we're trying to get out to the workforce generally. And that's about it from me. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gareth. And again, some interesting points covered there. In terms of change management and what we've all had to go through, all of our businesses, one massive change to lockdown, but I think the point that Gareth made is now there's another massive change coming back out of lockdown and returning to work. Also, the whole attitude to working from home. Be very interested to get into a conversation later about how that's changed. And I know, for instance, some of our school partners are saying, well, no, actually, we would like the new normal to be working from home, working from offices only by exception. And there are challenges related to that, and Gareth mentioned people working on their kitchen tables and what have you. It's not always comfortable. It's not always necessarily even safe or healthy for them. So there's some big issues kind of coming out of that. Also, Gareth, you helpfully mentioned questionnaires coming out from clients and, considerations from clients in terms of the business risk and the resilience of their supply chain, which segues really nicely onto our final speaker, Sarah Jane, who's going to give us a client perspective. Sarah Jane, over to you. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Sean. Hello, my name is Sarah Jane Waith, and I'm Head of Supply Chain and Contract Management for Transport for Wales. I've worked in rail with a freight manufacturer for 10 years, then in the water industry with AMEC, and then I spent 12 years as Head of Supply Chain with Costain. Before joining Transport for Wales only just a year ago. So Transport for Wales is a fairly new organisation, and we're wholly owned by the Welsh Government, providing support and expertise to the Welsh Government on all things transport and delivering on those strategic outcomes. So in addition to the rail franchise that Transport for Wales, Transport for Wales Rail Services, which is Keolis Amy, we also have some major work to deliver the South Wales Metro by 2023. So this is where we're upgrading the Core Valley lines. So there's electrifying and modernising of about 170 kilometres of track, installing overhead line equipment to power the new trains. There's upgrading of stations and signalling and new stations, modifying bridges and crossings and signalling equipment. There's vegetation management, line side civils. There's a lot of construction works in the transformation of the Core Valley lines. But we're also working on our active travel plan and integrated travel, which obviously everybody is trying to find different ways of moving around without using public transport. And obviously in Wales, we do have a 5-mile rule in place as well. So that limits where you can go and what you can do. But we need to give our customers a choice of travel modes through better connections, but also through the ease of ticketing. So there's a lot of work going on about what the future actually looks like. But what we have done at the start of the COVID, we instigated a tactical coordination group, and they meet at least twice a week, obviously with a number of other discussions and meetings that go on in between that. And it covers everything that is going on, the impact on our staff, our supply chain, logistics, the IT infrastructure from working from home. But there's a constant communication to everyone in our business to make sure that they're informed, that they understand what TFW are doing, what's expected of them, and what they can expect of TFW, but also any of the keeping them up to date with government announcements and any expert advice that's coming out at the time. We're keen to make sure that people's home life and work balance is as best that it can be, because obviously there are challenges with people, whether they are trying to work from home and they've got obviously children, which can be quite distracting, and even to the point where you've got parents who feel guilty because they're working and their child is trying to play. But and even looking after elderly parents, my father has dementia, so there's an extra sort of challenge there. But what TFW have been very good at is making sure that people's working hours work for them and around them, and that has come out I just come off a company call now, and in the chat function, for example, there was a lot of praising about how respectful Transport for Wales have been. And what a nice organisation to work for that is looking out for the well-being of staff. But these will continue, you know, for the foreseeable. You know, like it was said earlier, we don't know when this stops. I think it's just part of a new normal. And I think also we've got new offices that are being built in Pontypridd. And actually things have changed slightly, because we're looking now to develop the environment to be, you know, how do we want it to feel going forward? What do we need a new office for? I don't think the Monday to Friday 9 to 5 is something that suits people's working behaviours and patterns going forward. So we need to look at understanding how we want to work and what type of organisation we want to be. But other than that, our focus as well has been in the lockdown is keeping the trains running for key workers, but also supporting the supply chain in signposting them to various funding mechanisms. So Business Wales, Development Bank of Wales and Co-op have been working very hard behind the scenes for Welsh Government. And that is really to ensure that SMEs, social enterprises are obtaining the financial support through this time, and guiding them, taking them through their applications for loans and grants. And then early on at the start of the COVID, we looked at our supply chain to understand who needed financial support to ensure the service continuity. And that was in line with a procurement policy note for supplier relief that came out in March. And this was followed by another policy note on the recovery and transition, which builds on the first one. But that one then is active from, I think, 1st of July through to October. So what that's saying is that we need to extend the time in which we need to be pragmatic and provide a quick turnaround for payment, you know, and not delay in any way. So other than that, I've been keeping a watching brief and monitoring the supply chain throughout the lockdown. And I've been pleasantly surprised, actually, to see how robust the supply chain has been. You know, some have diversified into other areas. So I believe Hensel Castle Distillery has produced hand sanitizer for rail services. You have Elite Clothing Solutions, which is a social enterprise that have diversified in producing PPE, medical scrubs for NHS. And there's some suppliers, there's fabricators out there that actually have used the furlough scheme in a way where it was intended to be used, which is actually to avoid redundancies with a view of bouncing back, you know, and they've gone through without actually furloughing any of their staff. And then obviously there's companies that require those loans and grants to be able to see them through, you know, this crisis. We've also been working with our delivery partners to understand the increased costs and delivery times as a result of lost productivity through the implementation of social distancing measures. And like others in the construction industry, we've been working on our road to recovery, which also include COVID-19 marshals, enhanced cleaning regimes, staggered briefings, site briefings, and appropriate PPE. Where appropriate. But in general, across the supply chain, there is a concern that the situation will erode low margins further and place additional cost pressures on the supply chain, making it harder to invest for the future or for future innovations. So in line with the Code of Practice, Ethical Employment in the Supply Chain, there is a commitment not to put suppliers under any undue cost and time pressure. That can lead to unethical behaviour. So we need to find a balance of strategic outcomes and ethical behaviours. And with the supply chain right now, I think visibility of the pipeline from ourselves, TFW, rail services, obviously our franchise rail partner, and our tier 1 delivery partners who are working on the Core Valley line transformation, but they need to see what those opportunities, what the pipeline looks like in the short, medium and long term. We need to get the tenders out quickly, and we need to make quick decisions on saying that where public procurement allows us to. We have to make it easy to get into contract and work closely with our supply chain to remove any of the unnecessary delays, whether that's programme or payment. So other things really is that I've been working on business continuity plans. So looking at where we got any gaps, reinforcing those business continuity plans or strengthening those plans. And like I said, I think our recovery plan is really more about getting the pipeline out there, getting the tenders out there, getting that transparency of the opportunities out there. We will obviously need to continue to support any procurement policy notices that come out. And I think there's an ongoing supplier engagement and monitoring. Now, whether that's financial or just understanding their business continuity plans, I don't think you can take a financial credit score, for example. I think you need to take that with a pinch of salt, because every company you will look at will have been impacted. And I think you need to understand where, how financially stable they were before COVID, and with their business continuity plans, to be able to understand, you know, if they do need any support or what actually, but I think you need to work with them to understand what each individual supplier actually really needs from a client. I think looking at commissioning a new skills gap analysis would be a good opportunity. You know, the landscape has changed, so that would be a good opportunity. And I think, you know, industry networking and collaboration is obviously a continual driver for us, and I think for a lot of people. I think the challenges for us at the moment is to better understand the behaviours of the travelling public and how they might have changed, you know, as a result of COVID, or even their working patterns, and also what transport should look like in the future, which should support an integrated travel strategy. But for me, I think with crisis always comes opportunities. So I think where there may have been some supplier failures, there also may have been some new entrants, you know, or people coming up with the new ways of doing things, removing waste, or stop doing something that doesn't actually add any value for anyone, highlighting the decarbonisation agenda, reinforcing sustainable value in the delivery of our projects. And I think, as a number of you have said, you know, the increased use of technology is absolutely key going forward. And I think we just need to better understand our extended workforce and our customers through the use of technology as well. I get the feeling that the industry is ready to collaborate on a wider scale, and also share learning so we can accelerate recovery. I think we all understand we're in this together. And we do need to work together to get out of it. And I think it's also highlighted the need for a more resilient and agile supply chain, and not just managing the risk, but understanding how we can create value from that. And again, that's going to be through the use of technology systems, capturing data, rethinking strategies, changing the way we engage with our supply chain. I think the traditional way of having a supplier event where hundreds of people all travel to one place, and the cost of everybody to attend those type of events, you know, for me, that's yesterday, you know, and these new webinars and new technology ways of engaging with the supply chain is the way forward. You know, and if we can reduce our carbon footprint by doing that, then all the better. So I think we do need to strengthen our resilience. We could consider digital twins and things for scenario planning. I think, you know, it allows organisations to be a little bit more open to new ways of actually, you know, engaging and looking at solutions and problems, really. So I think for me, crisis comes opportunities. I look forward to realising some of those opportunities, whilst obviously learning from what has taken place and learning from the supply chain and industry partners and stakeholders. You know, so yeah, it's going to be interesting going forward now. The landscape's changing. So that's it from me.
Wonderful, thank you very much. A lot of stuff in there. Certainly some very key messages about support for supply chains and that isn't a one-size-fits-all situation. Different types of suppliers need different support. Some issues around collaboration, of course. This is what we do in the supply chain school, among many other organisations. We try to get everybody collaborating. Is Monday to Friday 9 till 5 dead? Are we looking at different ways of working, and certainly different ways of working with our suppliers? Also issues about things like financial scores, maybe a little less meaningful these days than maybe they were before. Okay, so we've got a bunch of questions, so I'm going to run through some questions that are on the chat now. The first one that came up, I think, was actually during Brendan's presentation, from Rob Lamb. Do we know the cost of antibody testing? Brendan, I guess that might be one for you, or if anybody else knows, please do say.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
So the following the research, you need 2 tests. So there's a PCR swab test and a blood test for the antibodies. It's around £200. It's delivered. So the difference between getting a home kit, which you can get online for a similar price, is that we would send an occupational health nurse to the site. The test would be sent away and delivered back within 2 to 3 days, and the results would be delivered through a secure dashboard, so you can actually get the client or contractor can get an overview of what the actual COVID rate is on a particular site. So it's slightly different to just somebody getting an individual one. It's more of a corporate solution for a site.
Okay, but potentially quite a significant cost if you want to test everybody on a site.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, but then if we are looking at local lockdown, for instance, in Leicester, then is that the difference between keeping the site going and having to close the site? So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next one, which I guess might also be for Brendan. What advice, or it could be for anybody else, what advice would you give to a business that sees one of its regional hubs or projects go into a localized lockdown, but they remain and stay in operation? What's the best practice steps they need to follow? I guess none of us really know what will happen here, but I'm interested, maybe Brendan, if you could kick off, and then, because I know you mentioned in your presentation that you'd had different, different sites in different areas opening and closing at different times. If you can maybe kick off, and then we'll open it up to see if anybody else has a view.
Yeah, I think for us, it's pretty straightforward. We have I imagine most businesses have the capability to work from home now. So for us, it would have a minimal impact. We can access through VPNs all of our shared drives and softwares and payroll. For sites themselves, that's a different kettle of fish. If a site is locked down, then that's very much it was an issue to us. We don't want it to happen because that's our core business.
Of course, yeah.
But then it would be the kind of responsibility of the contractor and management. We'd offer the testing facility, but we haven't crossed that bridge yet. I don't think anyone has.
No.
But yeah, enforcement by local authorities as well, local councils, I believe. Leicester will have the power to do that. So it might be taken out of our hands. That's my take on it.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have a view on that question? No, nobody else has a view on that question. So we'll move on to the next one. So the next question, very interested to understand how innovations in digitization and use of technology can be used to tackle COVID-19 within the supply chain. I guess maybe either Daniel or Sarah Jane to pick that up from a procurement perspective.
Hello. Right. I think for me, supply chain mapping would play a good part.
Sarah Jane, you might be on mute. I think we can hear you now.
No, can you hear me? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Sarah.
Okay. So I think for me, you know, supply chain mapping would play.
So Jane, I don't know if we can, if you're speaking, can't hear you and I can't see you at the moment.
Sean, I don't know if it's from your end.
I can see you now.
I can hear Sarah.
Can you hear me now, Sean?
Yeah, do you have a perspective on that question on
Yes.
use of digitization and technology to manage the supply chain in the crisis?
Yeah, so I think a supply chain mapping tool. Can you hear me, Sean? Okay,
Can't
Rosie.
hear you, I'm afraid.
Rosie, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can see your lips moving and I can't hear you.
I think some of the attendees have put in they can hear. Sean, can you hear me?
Can I maybe ask if anybody else, I can't hear Sarah Jane, I'm not quite sure why, you're not on mute.
I can
Daniel,
hear you, Sarah, so
maybe
just
you'd
carry
like
on.
to pick
Right.
up that question?
Yeah, Sarah, I can hear you also.
Yeah.
Okay, Sean, I think if somebody can tell Sean, then everybody else can hear me. So basically, you know, for me, I think supply chain mapping would be key, because it's not just it's not just about okay, I think everyone else can hear me. Sorry. So yeah, for me it was key, because it's not just about understanding the tier directly, you know, in contract with you. It's about understanding the impact throughout the supply chain, throughout the tiers. So it might be the small micro organization that's, you know, supplying to the a tier 2 contractor, they were supplying to the tier 1 contractor. And it might be the issue with them that there's a failure there. Now, if there is something that's on the critical path, then we should know about it. And if we need to support, or what support does that supplier need to actually, you know, survive this situation? I mean, is it about accelerating payments? You know, is it about making sure the opportunity? But I think unless you know that they even exist in your supply chain, you can't really do anything about it. So I think for me, the mapping of the supply chain is key. And I think, you know, technology and systems will actually allow you to do that. And I think also collaboration, you know, technology and collaboration, in order to understand what's going on with your supply chain and what the business continuity plans look like. You know, it's a mix between technology and actual old-fashioned engagement, is picking the phone up and talking to people as well.
Yeah, so I completely agree with what Sarah said there. I think obviously technology is going to help us to communicate quicker and easier with people, and these sort of forums I think will become more more prevalent, where we can have a hour-long conversation with all of our supply chain, whereas before that would be a day and what have you. The only issues we've had with technology and some of the solutions coming up is that that it hits the old GDPR buffers sometimes, and our legal teams get a bit concerned. So where it comes to certain testing and things like that, we're taking a cautious approach on some of the technology that we've seen out there. But I think anything that we can do to make communication easier and better is the way forward. Rosie, you know, first Sean back online.
What I'll do,
Chris, I've got a sorry, Daniel. I was going to come in and just give a couple of examples from the housing sector in terms of use of technology in supporting the supply chain. I mentioned a tool from Total Mobile, which is their remote assistance app, which is an easy to deploy video technology which can connect to any phone, doesn't require any download, basically sends you a text or the recipient a text. That recipient clicks on a link in the text that they receive, and it asks them to. It basically says yes, they allow to connect to the mobile phone's video camera. There's many use cases that is now starting to be explored for use around housing and wider sectors, where, for example, you might need work signing off, and normally you'd send a supervisor out typically to go and inspect that works, where that might be snagging or whatever. The operative can show the size and scale or request assistance. Video can be paused by the remote viewer, and circles drawn on it, or advice given about where they want you to zoom in. Used for collecting, obviously, information, etc. There's various apps out there which can be used. Work Mobile platform, I think it's called, Work Mobile Forms, which can be used to build apps very quickly for those that don't have remote apps for collection of data. There's other tools. So, for example, when you've got close working, maybe hanging doors, heavy fire doors, obviously in relation to the compliance agenda, things like the door stud. Two little clamps with some wheels which you can fit underside a door, enables you to level the door, fit it into its aperture. Both helps manual handling, but also in terms of avoids that close working contact. So just a few examples. Certainly worth looking at. The remote assistance apps are very affordable, very quickly deployable. I think it's about £1,000 a month for 250 hours of video. It's on a sort of a usage basis rather than a per user basis like a lot of technology is. So you could issue it to all your workforce, and they could have an easy way of connecting either to customers or to the workforce generally. So check that out.
Brilliant, thank you, Carl. I had a panicky moment where I couldn't hear anybody for a while, but I'm back again now. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, fine now, Sean.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so next question is about clients. Are you finding consistency of COVID-19 protection requirements from clients around the UK? Now, I think, Gareth, you mentioned that you'd seen some different requirements and different standards from clients. Would you maybe like to kick off by expanding on that, and then we'll see if anybody else has a view?
Yeah, fine, Sean, yes. I gave the example of the rail industry as a particular case in point. Network Rail introduced a draft standard which came out fairly hastily off the back of the construction mitigation measures, which gave specific rules on how many people could go in a commercial vehicle. So, for example, in a two-seater, you could only have a single occupancy, but in an 8-seater minibus, you could have 2 people, but there had to be a screen between the driver and the passenger. So everybody rushed around. 1 or 2 companies did already provide these screens. They've done work internationally, and they fitted certain vehicles. Others didn't have them. People were rushing around getting sheets of plastic and rolls of duct tape and sticking things together on the vehicles. Whereas, for example, London Underground, TfL, didn't have such prescriptive measures. They effectively left it to the supply chain to bring in their own control measures. Those control measures effectively said, however you decide to control it, you do it. So for that, you could have people in the vehicles with masks or visors and gloves, and you could probably get more people in the vehicles. So for different work sites, you would have different numbers of people allowed to travel in different ways. And that did create a few headaches in the very early days before people got a better understanding of it. So it has thrown up some challenges. That was just one example. Other suppliers immediately came on and said everybody had to have face coverings. So you found yourself suddenly placing an order for 10,000 face masks, but you were in a long queue with NHS and other people trying to get supplies, probably coming from China or somewhere. So that created a challenge in itself as well. So yes, it has been interesting in terms of seeing how different clients in different sectors interpreted the government guidelines and introduced their own control measures.
Brilliant, thank you, Gareth. Does anybody else have a perspective on the approach from clients? I think what I'm hearing there is not much consistency between clients' approaches. Does anybody else have a view on this?
I think we've seen this the same as well, Sean. To be honest with you, that certain clients are asking for thermometers on site to be doing temperature checks when we walk in, whereas others are following WHO rules where it says that's not necessary. So yeah, there is a fair amount of that where you can do things on one site but not on another one.
Yeah, I guess because of the speed of this pandemic, I suppose it's understandable that clients have maybe come up with different perspectives and different approaches. So next one, I've got a specific question for Lynch. How has Lynch approached sales staff visiting customers, particularly on site? I've seen a number of LinkedIn posts from A-Plant and Sunbelt beginning to visit the sites again rather than using online mediums.
Thanks, Sean. I think initially it was we were the ones that kind of told our staff that not to be visiting any of our customers for their own safety and for the customers' well-being as well. I think over when lockdown took place, that was pre-lockdown. So when lockdown took place, I think many of our sites and customers put kind of a blanket ban on any type of visitors. So whether it was our sales guys or anybody that wanted to go to the project, if they weren't there for work themselves or deliveries and collections, then they wouldn't be allowed in. I think once some of the restrictions started to lift, we've kind of been led by our customers. So if our customers feel that they can provide a safe environment to host meetings, whether that be on site out in the fresh air or whether that be in meeting rooms with restricted numbers on, then we've kind of worked with those customers to go out and visit them. So I think the biggest thing is that the customer's happy with what they're doing, and then our staff are happy with what they're doing. So none of our sales team or our operational staff that go out on site, including myself, we were all asked individually, are we comfortable going to visit a client? And we're also given some guidance that if we were put into an environment where we felt that social distancing wasn't in place, or the office wasn't, the room wasn't big enough to host the amount of people they wanted, then we kind of had some words put together on how we'd let our customer know that. So I think really it's important to it's still important to visit our customers. It's hugely important, but the well-being of the customer and the well-being of our own staff's got to come first before any visit in the current climate. So a lot's been done on web, Microsoft Teams and Zoom meetings. We've had a lot of those, which have been a great way of, I think somebody said earlier on, being super efficient with our time. So instead of driving an hour or getting the train an hour and a half to a meeting, it's roll up the stairs and go into the spare room and go to work that way, which has been able for me. I've been able to get a lot more into my days because I travel quite a bit. But I think it's now not being complacent and getting out and meeting people and seeing people, but putting everybody's safety first.
Thank you. Yeah, it's certainly completely transformed the way we operate the supply chain school. This session would have been done in a room somewhere in the country, and now we're doing it online. And so, interesting perspective that, I guess fairly obviously, the safety of your employees and customers is the first priority. Okay, so the next question I think is an interesting one from Chris Reed. Hi, Chris. Which seems to have been repeated umpteen times by the software. I'm not quite sure why. But what I'm going to do is to go around the virtual room and ask each of you to respond to this. It's a very general question. What level of impact assessment have you done to understand and mitigate the risk of COVID-19 related failure within your supply chain. Now, I know, each of you as organisations have different supply chains, so this is really a kind of future focused question around how we're thinking about these things now. If I can maybe start with Brendan, and then we'll go round the room, and I'll ask for a perspective from each of you.
As part of our business, we run credit reports on everyone that we supply to make sure that we've got adequate cover. That's no change in the COVID-19 era, but where we actually form part of our customers' supply chain, and what I have seen is pre-qualification on construction line. Did a COVID-19 questionnaire on builders profile. They did a digital report. Now on labour supply, that's quite straightforward, because have we got the guys to place into work that are qualified, vetted, etc. So there's no change there. So I think because there's no materials which I'd say would be at risk from being manufactured or being imported, we've been pretty safe. Over to Carl.
Thank you, Brendan. In relation to housing, we have all of our contractors tracked using CreditSafe and our supply chain. Obviously, that is just a set of radar, and to a certain extent, as Sarah said, it is just a bit of a pinch of salt. Obviously, right from the very outset, obviously, government was releasing PPN notices, so we encouraged engagement really between all the clients and their employed contractors to have dialogue around what was happening, to look at speeding up payment where they could, to obviously look at their sub-supply chains as well, and encourage the contractors to take a more sensible approach. We're starting to see an increase in the use of project bank accounts and quasi-project bank accounts across some of the larger contracts that we have. We're also looking at new contract clauses to fit into our JCT and NEC3 contracts, because obviously pandemic previously would have been classified as force majeure, and really that cannot apply now, because obviously it's known about, and force majeure clauses don't apply within contracts. So we're looking at drafting up contract clauses that look a bit more of a shared risk approach going forward, because obviously, the contract aspects as written don't really allow contractors to enjoy additional cost, and therefore we've been encouraging clients to take a more pragmatic, collaborative approach to looking at what the real cost changes are, both historic and now looking forward, particularly in relation to prolongation of new build, prolongation of internal works contracts, and looking at what real additional cost pressures there are, and having a more collaborative approach to seeking to address those. Obviously, that's having a bit of an impact on clients' budgets and expectations around what can be delivered within certain cost parameters. But that's the approach we've been taking, is trying to encourage that collaborative approach.
I think I'm probably next on the list. So within our supply chain, we reached out to a lot of the supply chain who we use early in the COVID lockdown time, to understand how their businesses were being affected, because we were still working as business as usual in principle. We needed to understand how the suppliers that we need every day could serve what we needed, whether it be the manufacturers who are going out to look at machines under warranty and service contracts. And initially there was a bit of panic that they were potentially furloughing too many people and not being able to support the business that was left over. But interestingly, we spoke to a number of the manufacturers, and they use machine telematics to track the working hours of the equipment that started to rise, and then ensuring that they had enough staff to support that equipment that was rising. We work with 2 or 3 of the manufacturers as well to take advantage of the quieter time to actually get a lot of equipment serviced and maintained, ahead of schedule, rather than being whilst it's on straight. So they could come into our depots, have a machine left to them in a secure, safe environment, and be left to work. So I think a bit of collaboration there, and like I say, some questionnaires to understand their impacts, whether they were bringing in goods or services or people themselves to do the work. So I think that's probably how we've tried to manage it.
Brilliant, thank you. Daniel, a perspective from you?
Yeah, so with our supply chain, especially our subcontractors, we have a lot of small and medium-sized companies that we deal with. And we basically just been talking to them constantly, finding out where there's any issues on that side. I brought back one of my guys from furlough pretty much just to go through a whole engagement piece with our supply chain to make sure that they are they're okay, and that anything we can do to support them. With materials and our bigger suppliers, amongst our central procurement team, we split out who we were going to talk to, and it's just really been a case of just keeping in contact with everyone, trying to use whatever information we can get to make informed decisions.
Okay, thank you. Gareth?
From our supply chain, we've used some of this slight downtime effectively to just go through a further supply chain mapping exercise. So we don't have lots and lots of suppliers. We don't buy many materials to use with our clients. Probably our biggest supplier is commercial vehicles. Our second biggest is probably PPE. But we have lots and lots of very small suppliers supplying us very small amounts of items or services. So we have used this opportunity to try and risk assess, not from a financial perspective, because our accounts department do that as a matter of course, but really from our perspective, contacting them. And it was interesting that in quite a few cases, the people you wanted to speak to had been furloughed. So it wasn't a straightforward exercise. And I found that with various organizations that where companies have furloughed staff, the people who are left are having to pick up more work, pick up other people's work, which is possibly outside of their normal area of expertise. So it's been a challenging exercise, and we haven't completed it yet, but we're still working through that. From our perspective of the Mawson group of companies supplying our services, either of labour or project manager or consultancy and design, into our clients, we've had a lot of questionnaires from our clients on a regular basis, asking a variety of questions in terms of resilience, financial position, resource position, and how we're managing it and how we operate it. So from the outset, I prepared a statement based on our disaster recovery and business continuity model, and then gradually added further information to that as I got it. And our accountant for Mawson International, she would feed me information in terms of our financial resilience, which I was glad to say was fine. So the clients have taken a key interest in us. They see us as a key value partner in various contracts. And it is important that there is that regular communication and honest communication between the client and us. And obviously, key for us is payment. If we're providing contingent labour or agency workers, we're often paying them on a weekly basis, but we're waiting to be paid on 30, 60, 90 days, whatever terms have been negotiated. So cash flow is key. Cash is king, and it's very important that we manage that very effectively. And we have been pleased to say that the clients we provide our services to have been very good in terms of payment.
Brilliant, thank you, Gareth. Sarah Jane, you touched on this in your piece of the discussion. Would you like to expand on some of the points that you made earlier on this one?
Yeah, so I think I absolutely agree with everything that Carl said about being pragmatic and taking a collaborative approach to reviewing the costs and the program and delays and what that mean and the impact. And you know, it's not just black and white, is it? We have to work through it. You know, and obviously, you know, the supply chain obviously needs time as well to understand the measures that they have to put in place because of COVID, even from a health and safety perspective. So I think it's making sure that you keep communications with the supply chain open, you know, and like I said as well, it's not just about the financial stability. You know, I've never really liked, you know, like if you took a Dun & Bradstreet sort of approach, I've never really liked that static information. I like to understand a little bit more about how they're actively performing. So it's not just about that. It's a trigger, and as things happen or their credit score decreases, it is a trigger to have a conversation. But mostly what you'll find is that there is justification or explanation behind some of the figures. So it's understanding what that is. It's understanding what business continuity plans they have in place. You know, early on, we were talking to some of the suppliers who, you know, were quite honest in how much time they had left to keep afloat. You know, and it's about, you know, as you said, Gareth, it's about being honest and being able to have that honest conversation, because you can't really move forward without the facts. So as long as the supplier feels comfortable and confident and trust the client in some of those conversations and hard conversations for them, if they feel that their business is about to fail, you know, but it's and each of them are going to be different, you know. I mean, even when I worked, you know, for Costain, having a sustainable supply chain was absolutely key, you know. So to have a supplier fail for whatever reason, even before COVID, you know, it's, as a client, you know, as a client or a customer, it's doing what you can within the realms of, you know, whatever remit you've got to be able to support them, and whether that is financial or accelerating payments. You know, there's a number of things that you can do, but I think it's just that you have to have the conversation first. So communication for me was key. Yeah, I think that's it, really, being pragmatic and having that collaborative approach to the contracts in which, you know, there is a severe impact in what you are doing.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a couple of questions now which I guess I need to answer about the school. So one is, has any work been done within the school or its partners or members group to identify potential over-dependencies on single points of failure within the construction industry supply chain? Have any initiatives or innovations been put in place to build resilience from high-risk areas? And then there's another question that says, it's great to see supply chain adopting and innovating in response to COVID-19 and the new normal. Will some of the best practice be demonstrated and captured and shared through the school? The answer to the second question is definitely yes. This is part of what we're doing here today. And we have a new dynamic process within the school now. We've gone into this new normal, where we have a meeting among the team every week to actually throw up new ideas around things and workshops that we might do, and this is one of them. Somebody said, well, you know, can we get a group of diverse partners together having a conversation about response to COVID? And we have. So we've got a much more dynamic and agile process in the school now. As ideas come up from partners, we have the opportunity to review those. I chair that group every week, every Tuesday morning, and we can put new things onto the program of the school in a very short time. So for instance, immediately after lockdown, we had a consultant come on and offer us some training on preparing a site after lockdown. They had a checklist and they had some workshop content to run there, and we developed that, promoted it, and put it on within a week. And I think we had something like 150 people on one of those workshops. In terms of looking at points of failure within supply chains, no, we haven't done work in that space for a while. We did do some work on supply chain mapping 2 or 3 years ago, which the partners expressed a great deal of enthusiasm for. We put some guidance out, but then in terms of looking at how you actually map the supply chain of an entire industry became a bit challenging, and we didn't have the budget or the resources to do that. So again, that's something that we'll take on board. I'll take into those Tuesday sessions, but I won't pretend right now that that resources is abundant, because we've had £800,000 of funding from CITB withdrawn pretty much overnight. So the school continues to be well funded, but we need to be very selective in terms of what we do and how some of this work is paid for. So we've got a few challenges of our own there, definitely. Okay, this really is probably a question for Sarah Jane to lead off on. How are TFW and others ensuring the teams of the COP ethical employment in supply chains are adhered to throughout the supply chains on items such as direct employment or collective bargaining coverage? That sounds like a very specific question for Sarah Jane.
Okay. Well, I think for me, the first thing is actually signing up to the code of practice, the ethical employment in the supply chain. That is written into our contract, so it's a contractual obligation of our supply chain. And then it's a matter of working with the supply chain to understand what their action plan is to comply with the 12 commitments that come out of the code of practice. Obviously, all our policies and things, all that is in our procurement process. You know, we do have to do a written annual written statement to Welsh Government. And in that, we ask of our supply chain to do the same. So we are expecting to have visibility of what their action plans are. There is an obligation in our ODP, our Transport for Wales rail services. There is an obligation in there to undertake supply chain audits. And we're working with them. Now, I know that they've developed what the audit schedule is and what the content is. I just need to work through them, because I think there was a little pause with this COVID. So I need to obviously move that forward a bit. But it is about having that transparency of their action plans. And if we feel that there are any high-risk areas, there needs to be a little bit more robustness in the audit that is undertaken. And there already has been a risk assessment done to understand where the high-risk suppliers may sit. And that might be due to geographical, where they actually are in the world, should we say, or the services or products that they are providing that may fall into a high risk category. So there's our own action plan, and then it's actually understanding and having visibility of the action plan from our supply chain.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, compliance and checking on compliance is always a challenge, and particularly transparency in supply chains and understanding the depth of the supply chains is a big issue. Yeah. If you take a look on the chat, various of you are sharing links to various different things, so please do take advantage of those. We're coming to the end of our session. I did say it would probably fly by, and indeed it has. I got a whole list of questions and things to discuss here that we won't necessarily have time to do. What I'd like to do now, just to close the session, if I can just go around the panel one more time and ask you just really in terms of where we've been to in this 100-day lockdown, and where we believe we might be going to. What's the one takeaway for you? What's the one learning point? And I'm going to start at the top of my list and pick on Brendan while everybody else thinks of the answer to that question.
Yeah, cheers for that, Sean. I can't get Boris Johnson out of my head at the moment, and that's probably not the answer you want. Probably not the answer that many of us want. I think the ability to adapt to what has been happening, having people within the company to actually hold the hand up, to be counted, contribute, essentially working hard for the benefit of making sure there's jobs for all to come back has been really key, and part of the culture. Two Irish founders, real people's person people. We're a people business, and that culture has emanated throughout the business. I think an important personal fact is we don't know what each of us on this call are potentially suffering with, whether that be the anxiety. There's a degree of resilience needed within all of us, but we don't know everyone's story. So being courteous about how we speak to people and we're communicating, and because some people might have been affected by COVID-19. I know some people that have. And I think communication, push on with the changing culture, working from home. It's now accepted, where companies before like to actually see people in the office and know that they are working. Now it's been proven that it can continue to work. Potential overheads drop. Yeah, that's about it. No Boris Johnson mentioned in the end. So there you go.
Well, we can thank you for that.
Thanks, Brendan. I'll pick up from that. Just interesting. What is the one takeaway from where we're at? I think, in terms of business, I don't think things are quite ever going to be the same again, even when COVID disappears. I mean, we were having a conversation in our EMT yesterday within the organisation about Efficiency North 2.0 and the impact of digitalisation, moving to more, less travel, less continuous driving from A to B across Yorkshire, meeting with clients. Certainly is making collaboration easier. We've had more people on webinars than we've ever managed to get in some of our regular meetings that we hold with our members. So I think it's helping us to drive collaboration. And I think in terms of transformation within the housing sector, it's probably put rocket boosters under their challenges that they foresaw in driving cultural change and move to more agile working methods as housing organisations, and probably put rocket boosters under their desire to get to their endpoint about tailored housing services, meeting tenants' needs, operating 24/7 through chatbots and AI in order to make their businesses more efficient. That gives them more money to spend on improving the stock and developing more stock. So I think it's that movement towards a more digitalised, lower carbon intensive world that we're all here to try and drive.
Brilliant, thank you, Chris.
Probably my personal take from it would be that it's very nice working from home every once in a while and getting to sit and have lunch with my children when they're not at school or when they weren't at school. But I think that's something that me as a father's not used to. So I think that's great. Like I've had to see that. I've got to see that side of day-to-day life, which I normally don't, other than on a Saturday or Sunday. From a business point of view, or an industry point of view as well, I probably think the wellness and the camaraderie between employees, colleagues, other businesses, customers, competitors. We have a very British way of saying, "How are you doing?" and then a very British way of not listening to what the person says. So I think a bit more meaningful when you do ask how are you doing and how are things at home and everybody all right, and has anybody been affected? I think that's a great take for us all to take forward, no matter what we do or how big our businesses are or what we do within those roles. That kind of human element, of making sure the person is good, is well, and is fit for work, and they're not just there, or they're not just logging on every morning, but they're ready to work, and they're ready to kind of deal with everything that comes with it. And I think sometimes people haven't been. So yeah, from my point of view, it's definitely the people element. And I think Carl touched upon that. The stuff we've learned over the last number of months is probably going to change all of our ways of working, whether it be remotely or less travel. Like, there's some really good points in there. So yeah, they're probably my individual, and then my point for the group as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Chris. Daniel.
So personally, I couldn't disagree with Chris more. Having 5 kids home at school and from university and everything, my lunchtime is like walking into Basra some days. So, apart from that side of it, but no, I think it's shown how resilient as an industry we are, and how we can change and adapt. I think we're very lucky that this has come around at a time when we do have the technology to back it up. If this had happened 10, 15 years ago, it would have been a very, very, very different world. So I think we've got to look to the positives, support our people, understand that people are off on furlough, aren't just having a lovely time sitting in their garden, and it is affecting people in other ways. But try to stay positive, and some of the things that have happened we'll give positive outlooks for the rest of the industry, and see if we can just keep that going.
Brilliant, thank you. Gareth.
Thank you. From a sort of corporate perspective, I think it's important, as I mentioned, that we communicate effectively, clearly, concisely, and consistent, so people aren't unsure of what we're doing and where we're going. We need to educate our line managers to deal with any mental health issues or declarations as they arise. We need to promote access to support, and provide those additional resources in a working environment that promotes and encourages good well-being overall. From a personal perspective, I think we just need to show that we care, show people that we genuinely do care. And I think that just may be listening to a conversation, it may be getting in touch with people on a more regular basis. Those sort of actions, small actions, can make a big difference.
Brilliant, thank you. And a final word from Sarah Jane.
Hello. Yeah, thank you for that, Gareth. You sort of hit the nail on the head there, really. Just to add to that, really, for me, it's about the opportunity to work in a different way for everybody, even to engage with the supply chain in a different way. Well, one of the things from a business perspective, though, is the opportunity to remove wasteful activities that don't deliver on any value for anybody in the supply chain and the client. There are a lot of unnecessary activities, so I think it's an opportunity to do that, and even strengthen the supply chain strategy to build a resilient supply chain. Whether that's through the use of technology, I think it just gives it a lot more gravitas to actually invest in technology to be able to support our businesses going forward. That's it from me.
Brilliant, thank you. Hey, that brings us to the end of our time. I did say it was going to fly by. Thank you very much to all of our speakers for such an engaging couple of hours, and I think we've covered a whole range of issues and insights there. Please do complete the feedback form, those of you that have stayed on the call, and thank you for staying. Please do keep an eye on the Supply Chain School website. We're continually delivering events, and we're continually coming up with new innovations and things that we think our members might benefit from. So thank you very much for supporting us, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.